Coming up on this week's show, we talk preserving flash games,
playing Panzer Dragoon in VR,
and we talk to Atari legend Al Alcorn.
Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 218, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
and me, Joe Fox.
Now, every year on this show, around Christmas time, we do a little thing called the Retro Hour annual Christmas Super Quiz. And recently, being spending a lot of time indoors with the family, watching TV, eating snacks, feels a bit like we should maybe put the Christmas tree up again. Kind of feel like, why don't we enjoy ourselves? But actually, how's about this for a little question, lads? Name the game, released in 1972, you probably saw it in arcades back in the day, by a gentleman called Al Alcorn.
Well, we could pretend and get it wrong, but I know it's Pong.
Yeah. Because you've seen the title of this week's show.
Because I've seen the title of this week's show.
And that was a sexy arcade unit, wasn't it? Yeah,
it was. There is actually, I think it's an original. There's one at Arcade Club in Leeds.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's got the paddles on there.
Yeah.
I went there with my mate Paul a few months ago, and it's so much fun. I mean, Pong, being, considering it is one of the earliest one of the earliest video games, it is one of the most fun two-player experiences, I think, in the history of games. That adrenaline you get, when your paddle's going and the ball's just going to miss it. It's like a really exciting game. It really gets me hyped up.
But also, it's really homemade when they made that unit. I remember they were saying they were using little baking trays for bread to collect the coins.
And milk cartons.
When they'd drop in, it was a domestic TV stuck in there, and they even faked the serial numbers, so they made it 001000, to make it seem like they had more units out there.
Oh, wow.
Well, we had Nolan Bushnell on, of course, the owner of Atari back in the day, pretty much the father of video games. He joined us on a couple of years ago, episode 100 of the podcast, and we got some great stories. And I've always wanted to talk to the man who was behind Pong. Al Alcorn is an absolute legend in the world of video games. Had a long career at Atari. Obviously, the thing he's most known for is Pong. For being such a simple game, it really did change the world. I mean, that was for a lot of people, that was their first two-player experience of video games.
Yeah.
So today, he's very generously agreed to give us a bit of time to talk about his time at Atari and also kind of the story behind Pong as well, which, you often think, it's such an easy game. It's literally two paddles on a screen and a little ball going across. How can there be more to the story of that? But it's actually got a really interesting tale behind it. So Al Alcorn is our special guest. He'll be coming up on the Retro Hour podcast in around 15 minutes from now. Now, of course, every week we talk about what's been happening in the world of retro gaming. And VR is something that we often see VR. I mean, you go through stages, Ravi, where you love virtual reality, then you get a bit bored of it.
Yeah.
I remember a couple of years ago, you built a dedicated room.
I built a room and now I've sold it all because it was too uncomfortable. It felt like I had a huge block of metal on my head or something. It was like I had the first HTC and it was quite... I could do about 30 minutes on it, 45 minutes. But actually, I'm really getting into AR, but I see that VR's kind of going into a different area now. It's getting a lot of retro spaces and places that we've not been in before or since the kind of 90s, and it's turning them into VR titles.
Well, there are some games. I mean, VR for me it's something that when I'm playing it, I quite enjoy it, but often I've really got to, make an effort to get the VR helmet on and get the games loaded up. And, it's often something I can't be bothered to do. But occasionally, every couple of months, I'll be like, let's have a little VR sesh. If I've got a bit of time on my own, I'll do it. But there are certain retro games that you think would actually make really good VR titles. One of them that stands out, that someone's actually done, is Panzer Dragoon.
Yeah, Panzer Dragoon was an absolutely fantastic title, and it was kind of a rail shooter.
Yeah.
But you were on these giant dragons. You were kind of flying around, shooting at each other. It was really exciting title, actually.
Yeah, I like Panzer Dragoon. I've never actually played them, but I have got 1 and 2 for the Saturn and would love Panzer Dragoon Saga, but I'm not ready to part with £1,000 yet. But that's really cool.
Pocket change to you, Joe.
Pocket change, mere pennies.
Your worldwide famous rock band. Come on, throw money like that around.
Yes. But yeah, that's really cool that they've because that would actually, that's the kind of game that would translate to VR really well, I think.
So what's happened then?
Well, basically, there's a Tokyo-based company called Wildman, and they've developed a new Panzer Dragoon. So it's a new game within the series.
Wow,
okay.
And it's called Voyage Record.
Oh.
And basically, they haven't announced which VR system it's going to come out for yet. But it's going to be a first-person view, and you kind of use the VR as the handgun for the rider. So your
Okay.
controllers are like the handguns. So I'm guessing it might be like the Vive or the Quest.
Well, the Quest has got handheld.
Yeah,
or
yeah,
controls.
It'd be interesting if it comes to PS4.
Yeah, it could
it
even be PSVR,
PSVR,
with the lollipops.
Yeah,
And they've released like a tiny screenshot at the moment, but it does all look completely 4K and like high res. But there's not much detail about it. But I think it's pretty cool that they're continuing this series. And, you know, we've seen it in the Saturn form. We saw it later on in the Xbox. It'd be great to see it in a virtual reality.
You know, other games I think, certainly the ones that spring to mind. Imagine Magic Carpet.
Oh, what a game!
that'd be sick.
Imagine that. I think I'd last about 20 seconds before I puked.
Yeah. I mean, that was the kind of game that made you feel a bit sick anyway, just on the, on the TV.
I always found with Magic Carpet, when you saw it, you were like, this looks amazing. And you played it, you were like, oh my God.
Yeah.
I remember me and my brother playing the demo for PS1 and being blown away by it. And you look back at it now and you're like, it looks like diarrhea.
Yeah. But you'd never seen anything like it back then, had you?
exactly.
It was a really impressive game. Again, it was one of those, it was more like a graphical demo, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which a lot of VR stuff is today.
Yeah.
So, yeah, bring back Magic Carpet in VR. Come on, make it happen. Now, another game, actually, that used to make me puke while we're talking about it is Alien Breed 3D. Have you ever played Alien Breed 3D, Joe?
No, I'm not familiar with it. I saw this story myself and I was going to send it over to you, but then you sent it me, funny enough.
You played Alien Breed 2D?
No.
Right, so we're starting right from the beginning. Here.
Okay.
Well, essentially, there was these were games that were famous on the Amiga, weren't they,
Yeah.
back in the day? There was Special Edition 92, and Alien Breed 2 came out
Yeah,
as well.
so they were like top view ones.
Yeah, overhead.
Before,
Yeah.
And this was the 3D was when they went into the first person shooter.
So a Doom clone.
Yeah.
Yeah, Doom clone. But the problem was Amiga was never very good at Doom clones. And Alien Breed 3D had a very small window. It was very narrow.
Yeah.
Like all of the levels were quite tall, but they had huge walls. And
Yeah.
it was kind of hard to navigate. So on the original Amiga, it's never been really good
And
to
it's
play.
only half the screen as well.
Yeah, it's never
Yeah.
been good to play unless you've got one of these stupid new cards like the Vampire that ramps it up to some really high speed, and then you can. I remember Dan told me, "Oh, I'm finally playing it at full speed." You know,
Only
about
took 20 years.
20 years later, yeah.
But back in the day, you could have the most souped-up Amiga and still it couldn't run it
Yeah,
fast
yeah,
enough.
yeah.
It was one of those games that really the hardware wasn't made for. But now, you know, obviously today we've got stuff like, we all seem to talk about this every week, GZ Doom or GZ Doom.
Yeah.
Like, an open source Doom engine. Well, they've actually someone's essentially took the levels from Alien Breed 3D and put it on the GZ Doom engine.
Okay.
So it means today, if you want to play that classic Amiga FPS that no one had hardware powerful enough to play, you can just download it and play it on your PC on GZ Doom now.
And
which
it
is pretty
looks really fantastic,
Yeah.
like running at full speed. And if you remember, the GZ Doom was the one where they did Zombies Ate My Neighbours
Yeah,
on
yeah,
it,
yeah,
and,
yeah.
previous projects that we've kind of talked about. And, you know, it doesn't yet feature all 16 maps, but they are converting and adapting. And they've added additional monsters and surprises and tweaks as well. I like the lighting in it. It looks a bit more dynamic as well and a bit darker.
It looks very similar to Doom 64.
Yeah, in terms of the look of
like
it.
the lighting and the look of it
Yeah.
and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, because Bjorn Lin actually did the soundtrack to it as well.
yeah, yeah.
And apparently, you know, that.
He did the Worm soundtrack
Yeah,
as well.
really. We've met him before, haven't we, Bjorn?
Yeah, Bjorn's lovely.
Yeah, I thought we had. So, yeah, it looks really... I mean, I love it when you get stuff like this. It's kind of a reimagining of something that you did play back then. Again, I think it's because I didn't have a system that was fast enough to play it properly. I think on my A1200 back then, I probably ran it at around 8 frames a second.
Oh, yeah. Spot on.
Yeah, it was,
One video you should all watch is by a YouTuber called Ahoy, and it's called
Yes.
Doomed: The Embers of Amiga First-Person Shooter, and that goes through every single amazingly bad first-person shooter for the Amiga.
There's Ravi's retro pick.
Yeah, I think we're trying to kind of recreate Doom. You know?
Ahoy's awesome. He did he did videos about Doom. I've seen he does videos about like certain types of guns. That are in
Did you see
games.
the recent one? The
I saw
history of exploding barrels in games. That is
Wow.
so interesting.
Oh, wow.
Right?
And he did a really good one about Polybius, you know, that kind of legendary
Yeah.
urban myth arcade machine. But it's really cool though because his videos are awesome, and he only brings one out like every 6 months or something. But you know it's worth the wait. Cause
Oh, yeah.
we've asked him to come on, but he never replies. But if
Come
if
on,
you,
Ahoy.
yeah, if you ever do listen to Ahoy, we'd love to have you on. Now, Flash games, not something that generally gets a lot of love.
Got me through school.
Do you have any ones you remember?
Yeah, but I can't remember what they were called.
That is exactly what I was going to say.
Newgrounds.com. I remember that
the one
was
that's
a good
coming to mind now is the Madness Combat game.
Right.
So Madness Combat was the videos, but there was a game of it as well on Newgrounds. And then that other one, which actually became a real game where you jumped off the walls and stuff.
I remember the Stickmen ones for ages. There was like Stickmen fighting and like loads of different levels of Stickmen stuff. And then, do you remember Trials HD? There was original little bike one where you'd kind of go across the screen and jump.
Loads of Trials games on Flash games.
I remember mainly the comedy videos though. There was some hilarious stuff. But before kind of viral videos or memes, there was
when you'd email it to your mates.
Oh, yeah.
You'd have about 50 like forwarding addresses all the way down.
The thing was with Newgrounds as well, you'd always end up in like the porn bit by accident.
Yeah,
like,
by accident.
Oh, what's going on here?
That's why you got kicked out of computer class at school.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, Flash games are not real. I mean, they're being replaced for the casual gamers by phone games these days, or Facebook games, even if they're still around anymore. But there has been there's a bit of an effort now to preserve Flash games because, as much as we might think they're naff, they were an important part of online gaming. You know, that, for a lot of us, that was like our first online gaming experience, really,
100%.
playing Flash games. So at the moment, there's an organisation called the Strong Museum who've partnered with a web gaming portal called Congregate. So they're actually making an effort to preserve as many Flash games as they can get and have a way that you can play them again. So, I mean, obviously, Flash support has ended, hasn't it? I think Flash is actually going away.
Flash is probably one of the most unsecure things in the world now. So they're ending support for it fully because HTML5's taken over. So your browsers are going to start rejecting Flash.
Well, they already do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So archiving this is going to be really important because I'm sure you won't even be able to get onto the sites because it'll be like security warning and all of this, you know.
But if they could have some kind of... They haven't said, you know, what they're going to do with the archive. Essentially, at the moment, they've just announced, look, we're making a collection of these games. But if they had them on a website and maybe like a wrapper so you could actually play Flash
or I
in
think
another technology.
On the fly conversion to HTML5 or something might make it playable, you know.
Yeah, and then you play them for about 20 seconds. You're like, yep, this is boring.
Oh, this reminds me of my last year at school. Yeah, okay.
It's like when they put all of GeoCities back up again. I went through about 4 sites and I thought, yeah, this is crap. It is important to preserve this stuff, though. Now, one game that obviously, you know, if we're talking about the Spectrum, the most famous game on the Spectrum, Jet Set Willy. We were at Play Expo in Manchester last year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And Paul Drury did a talk with Matthew Smith. First expo we'd done in, about 10, 15 years. And, I think the last one was with you, actually, wasn't it?
Yeah, years ago.
So it was great to hear him talking about that. And we actually did broadcast that on our podcast as well. So if you want to check out kind of the behind the scenes about Jet Set Willy, check out an earlier episode of the Retro Hour podcast. I'm sure you can find it on our website. But there was a little project that a lot of people kind of forget about that, you know, obviously Willy was in a couple of games on the Spectrum, but there was one called The Perils of Willy. And that was a conversion that came out on the VIC-20.
Well, famously, kind of, Jet Set Willy vs. the Taxman was the one that
never came out.
That never came out, and kind of ended Matthew Smith's career because you know, kind of he couldn't cope doing it. But this one seems like a different title.
Yeah, well, this stars Minor Willy. He's in there, and he essentially has he gets tasked by the housekeeper Maria to clean up things that's been left around the house after a house party. So essentially he's going around picking up bottles, that kind of thing, just tidying up the house. But this game only came out on the VIC-20. So Spectrum fans, this is like a Minor Willy game they probably never got to play back in the day. But it turns out now someone's actually done a port of it to the Spectrum. So Minor Willy is really back on his spiritual home. So if you're a Specky fan back in the day and you always wanted like a third Minor Willy game, then finally, all these years later, you've got one.
And you could probably play this on your Spectrum Next as well, I guess.
I imagine it would work on that. Yeah, I can't see why not. Or Flash. Maybe someone did a Flash on the Spectrum. Sure, that would work too. But it's really cool. That's all I'm going to do when I get home, you know, look at all Flash games before it gets discontinued. But I mean, yeah, seeing like a game like that, it is always a bit weird when you check out games that maybe had characters in that were on other platforms that you didn't play back in the day. And you're like, oh, they don't belong in that game. So, yeah, it's kind of a bit bizarro world. But yeah, if you want to check that out, I'll put a link in our show notes to that and everything else we talked about this week at theretrohour.com. Now, of course, this podcast comes out every single Friday, but the only reason that we can do that is thanks very much to your support. You may have heard at the moment, we've got a bit of a fund on. We're trying to get a studio built this summer, hopefully, so we can bring you even more content on the Retro Hour podcast. And after years of people suggesting it, we finally did it. We set up a Patreon last month. And we were a bit nervous about doing it. We're like, oh, is anyone really going to support this?
We wanted to work out the right tiers and the right rewards, and I think we've got it right.
So people are actually giving us a lot of support on there. And that's incredible. You know, we're nearly at our goal, not too far off to get the studio built. Obviously, we're going to need a bit up front to get deposits and get all the studio built itself. So, you know, it's going to be a few months until we can do it. But thank you so much, guys. We're really blown away by your support. So anything we get into the running of the show is really going to help us out in our goal of building our own studio. And of course, for doing that, we'll give you a bit of love on the podcast as well and give you a mention on the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. Just like this week, thank you so much to Lipan Sumo,
David Hart,
Jane Hamill,
Jim Wheel,
and Hafran Ranjov.
We do try and say the names properly. We try our best.
We try.
Yeah, we do. We'll give you a giggle if we get it wrong at least. So thank you so much for your support. If you'd like to do the same, actually, you want to back us on Patreon, we'd really appreciate that. You'll find the link on our website at theretrohour.com.
And you can get an ad-free episode of The Retro Hour and also bonuses like getting it a little bit early and maybe a few things that we're doing extra, like documentaries.
And the Retro Hour After Hours.
Our cheeky little
Cheeky.
sexy bonus podcast, which we've done one episode of so
Yeah,
far.
yeah.
There will be more coming.
There will be more.
Obviously, with the situation we've had recently, it's kind of put a bit of a blocker on stuff, but we've got mics at home and stuff. We'll get another episode of that out very soon. So listen, thank you so much for your support, guys. It really means a lot to us. And if you'd like to back us, you'll find all the information at theretrohour.com. Now, before we chat to this week's special guest, the legend that is Al Alcorn, just time for this week's retro picks. Now, you've actually talked about the Pico 8 on the show before.
Yeah, so we did a show a while ago and we were talking about video games development and somebody messaged me and we were saying, actually, you know, you had all these game development pieces of software back in the days and it was quite hard nowadays. And he was like, no, it's not. There's the Pico 8. We have mentioned it before. It's an absolutely fantastic little development environment. And I've actually been on a Pico 8 course at the National Video Game Museum.
I do remember you doing that.
Yeah,
actually,
and I sat there and I learned about how to kind of make games on this, and it's really fantastic. It's great for editing code, music, sprites, maps, and it's all built into the console as well. So you just have this little environment that you can develop in. So if you check out the link in the description, then you can see some Pico 8 resources, you can see projects that people have made, and you can kind of download some games.
Absolutely. Well, I've been checking out one of our friends on YouTube. Now, I love this guy. This is actually, it's probably one of the first YouTubers I ever watched. And I don't think this guy gets enough love. And this is Paul is the Best.
Oh, I love Paul is the Best. Like, you're right. Years and years and years ago, we used to watch Paul, and he's still doing it.
Yeah, Paul is the Best 3 UK on YouTube. And at the moment, what he's been doing is he's been doing this for a few months now, a game a day. So what he'll do is he'll pick a different system every month, and he'll do a game from that system every night at 6 p.m.
Oh, really?
At the moment, he's doing arcade games. So he's done Dead or Alive. He did Turtles Arcade. The arcade version of Outrun he's done as well. Cruising USA, Shinobi, The Simpsons Arcade, Chase HQ. So he does, and he did like the Commodore 16 recently. He's done Spectrum games. He does so much on there. Normally, most of his videos, he drinks a few pints while he does them.
Yeah.
Don't watch it around the kids. There's a bit of language in them too. He's hilarious though. I love his videos. So again, I've probably watched him for since about 2007, 8, a long time. So.
And I've seen him around, you know, he's been in Retro Gamer, he's done a few things with them, and also he's come up and said hi to us at shows, so it's always great to see Paul.
I chat to Paul a lot on Facebook, top lad. What's your retro pick this week then, Joseph?
I just want to give a shout out to Nintendo Life, which is a fantastic website. Pretty much my go-to website to find out what's going on. And, you know, there's so much great stuff about retro games on there as well. You know, we get a few of our news articles from there sometimes. Lots of our news articles. But no, it's a great website. So, you know, if you're interested in the podcast and you want to read up more stuff as well, Nintendo Life is just like a spot on one for like day-to-day, you know, daily news and daily updates with like what's going on with retro gaming. Great website.
And of course, everything we do talk about on the show, I put them all in our show notes. You don't have to Google them or search around, you'll find them all in our notes on your favourite podcast app, or just head to our website at theretrohour.com. And next, we are going to be joined by an absolute veteran of the video games industry, getting some stories about the earliest days of the arcades and the home video game market, working alongside legends like Nolan Bushnell, Steve Jobs and Woz, and of course, the story of Pong. Next, with Al Alcorn on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time to welcome on this week's very special guest, a true veteran who's been there since the earliest days of the video games industry. Welcome to the show, Al Alcorn.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. Look forward to chatting with you.
Really appreciate you joining us. Now, let's start your story in San Francisco. That's where you were born. I mean, what was your early life in San Francisco like?
Yeah, San Francisco was an interesting city at that time. It was pretty cosmopolitan, and public schools gave a great education. But I'll tell you, in the early days, I was always fascinated with electronics and how things worked. And fortunately, I had a neighbor. I lived, right near the corner of Haight-Ashbury before it got famous. And a neighbor across the street had a television repair shop about a half a mile down Haight Street. And I would go there after school, and I was like 12, 13 years old in junior high school, and helped fix radios and televisions. And my father got me signed up into a electronics correspondence course. And so I, at that early age, decided I wanted to be an electrical engineer, even though I really didn't know what they did, And so I got to go to the San Francisco Public Schools has a one college prep high school called Lowell High. And I went there basically because the neighborhood I was living in was kind of a rough neighborhood, and the local high school my brother went to was pretty violent and was one of the worst schools in the city. So I begged to get into Lowell. I squeaked in and saved me from that stuff. And also I wound up on the football team, which proved to be very, very profoundly instrumental and became a big high school football athlete, which subsequently got me into Cal Berkeley. Where I played football for Cal Berkeley for a little less than a week. And I had to decide, do I want to be an engineer or I'm going to be a football player? And I remember it was the end of summer, and school started, and we were having double practice every day, 2-hour workout sessions. And I was in a fraternity house, and I go back to the house after practice, and I literally lost 10 pounds of weight every day in practice, and would regain it with just water, rehydrating. And here I am trying to do calculus and physics at a college level. I think I'm going to go with the engineering stuff. So that's how that all got started.
Was that a tough choice to make then? 'Cause obviously you're very passionate about football too.
Yeah, it wasn't that tough. No. I mean, frankly, remember this at this point, this was the 60s. This was 65, 66. And it was in the middle of the Vietnam War. There was protests going on. There was the draft. I had people my age going to Vietnam and dying. So going to Cal, any college, would keep you from getting drafted and maybe die. So it was a lot. And it made you think about what was going on. All of a sudden, the school had we didn't go to class for a while, boycotted and whatnot. And my father was a merchant marine shipping napalm to Vietnam, very much pro-war. My brother was a police officer in a neighboring town. And he'd come out to our campus and throw tear gas at us, and we got along well as a family. But it made you think about what was important, and made you understand whether you can trust your government or not. That sort of stuff. It sort of reflected in what we did at Atari later on.
I mean, you mentioned about your interest in electronics at an early age as well. Would you consider yourself a hacker in the traditional sense of the word?
Sure. At that point, in those days, the term wasn't used as such, but clearly I was taking apart televisions. I was fixing them, building things. It's 66 or 65 when I was in high school. Lasers had just been invented. And for my high school physics, there was a senior project everybody had to do. And I got the award. I built a working pulse ruby laser.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I guess you'd say I was a hacker.
Well, was it at Berkeley when you first discovered computers?
Yeah. Berkeley was, God, I was going to, God, it didn't hurt. I had to pay my way through Berkeley. We were fairly poor. It was a great school. And so I wanted to be an electrical engineer. Well, the department I had to take electrical engineering and computer science, whether I wanted to or not, right? And everybody in engineering had to take E1, which was programming. This is before BASIC was invented. And we were programming Fortran with punch cards on a big mainframe computer, either an IBM 7090 or a before Cray. Anyway, it was So I learned about it was very important. I learned Fortran and alcohol programming and how you could apply it. So that was my first exposure.
Were you playing any of the early kind of mainframe games that were around at that stage?
Not really. No, there were not on that computer. This was a big computer, and what I did though is one of the courses, a computer course. A friend of mine and I, again, you had to use punch cards. So you'd go punch a deck of cards. That we had to go on campus to a building to do that and submit the deck. And then 2 hours later, come walk back, pick up your printout and see what happened. And this could take forever if you didn't get it right the first time. A friend of mine and I discovered a terminal online to the main computer in the basement of the chem building. And you could get in at night. And it was just sitting there. And we figured out how to log on, and we could run the program in batch mode ourselves. The professor was very upset because they billed him time for everybody to use the computer, and he was the only one supposed to use it. And it was, So we did a little hacking back then. Well,
after Berkeley, I mean, you got a job, and was that when you first met Nolan Bushnell then in that role?
Yeah. What happened? It wasn't after Berkeley. Halfway through Berkeley, right. College is a grind, and Berkeley was not a nurturing environment, shall we say. You either succeeded or get the hell out of here because there's 5 guys that want your place. So the pressure was very high, and I wasn't about to quit school because that would mean I'd go to Vietnam. But there was this program, little used, called a work study, where you could go to school for 6 months and then work in industry for 6 months, split your time. And I figured, hey, that'd be great. I could make money, would help pay my way through school, and I might enjoy learning something. And long story, I wound up a job at Ampex, a little spin-off of Ampex called Videophile, which is where I met Nolan. And I worked with some of the finest engineers in the world. Got to be mentored by people that invented videotape recording, and so that was a very fortunate thing. And Nolan was one of the people there. He was not the best engineer there, but from a technical standpoint, but he was good, and he was an entrepreneurial sort. He was always putting together, figuring out ways to make money.
Do you remember your first impression of him? Did he come across quite charming then? And
he was an enthusiastic young guy out of college, out of Utah. And I didn't work with him too much. He was on a different team, but he was. He actually put together a investment club group. So back in those days, normal people didn't own stock. That was for wealthy people. So if you wanted to be in the stock market, you had to get enough people together to get enough money that you could get a broker to sell you some stock. And that's what Nolan did. He got together with some other engineers, and had a little stock group going. I thought, that was pretty cool. I didn't have any money, so it wasn't a problem.
Well, obviously, Atari was initially called Syzygy in the earliest days. So when did you join then, and what were you initially working on when you got there?
Well, let me tell you this way. So one day, Nolan and Ted Dabney worked together, shared an office, and Nolan had this idea for computer space, making a raster scan version of computer space, if you know what I mean, turning computer space into something that could be affordable and cheap. And that's what his passion was. And he did that after work at Ampex and got Ted Dabney to help him. And they went off. Eventually they quit, which everybody was shocked, and went to work for this little company, the only company west of the Mississippi that made video games, called Nutting Associates. They made a game called Computer Space, a coin-op game, and built this game for them. They designed it there, and one day they took us over to lunch. They took our whole little group and came over, and they showed us the prototype, the working thing. It was quite impressive, but I didn't think it would do much or whatever. And then a few months later, Nolan and Ted came over to take me to lunch. Hey, that's nice. Wow, it's very nice of them. And they offered me this job. And Nolan, it's funny, he had a turquoise blue Buick station wagon, and it was a company car. And I'm going, wow, what's a company car?
Wow.
It's a car you can drive, you have to pay for. Like, wow. I never heard of such a thing, like this is fun. And it was, so they offered me a job. They offered me $1,000 a month salary and 10% of the stock in the company. In my calculation, I was 24 years old, and I figured the stock would be worthless. And $1,000 a month was a little less than I was already making at Ampex, but I figured that I would get in a startup. See, working at Ampex, you're an engineer and you're just a little tiny gear in a big machine.
Yeah.
And so you only see one part of the world of engineering. And if you have a startup, you got to do everything from janitorial duties to marketing to everything. And I'd learn a lot more. And then the company would fail. My plan was the company would fail in a year or two. And I'd go back to Ampex, and I'd figured out that if you did that, you'd be hired in at a much higher level than if you just stayed at Ampex. So that was my strategy. Did not work out, but that was the plan.
Well, I mean, when you were there at Atari in those earliest days, did it feel like you were on the verge of something big then? It must have all felt, this new industry. Was it a very exciting place to be?
Well, Nolan was the only guy that thought we had a new industry, okay? Nolan was, it's going to be $1 million industry. We're going to build... we're going to build 100 Pongs a day. Oh my God, this guy's nuts. And I've got documentation. I've got memos to prove that we argued about this because, hey, we had no money, no equity, no investment. I didn't even know what equity was at that point. And but okay, we'll just go along. And in retrospect, Nolan was brilliant. For starting a company, normally when you start a company, you got to get people, angels, to put money in the company, right? Give you some startup capital. Mm. We didn't have any. We had a coin-op route. They'd save money from royalties on computer space, and they bought a bunch of pinball machines and other coin-op stuff, and we had a little route in our area, and that provided cash flow. I mean, it was that level, quarters coming in. And Nolan had a contract with Bally. Provided some cash, so we had a little office with 3 or 4 of us in the office, and so there wasn't much expense. And Nolan sat me down to design this simple video game, and okay, sure, I'll go do it, And I whipped it out. It actually took about 2 or 3 months. I appreciate Nolan giving me credit for doing it in a week, but I am not that good. And it was really funny because Nolan gave me this story that we had a contract from General Electric. Wow, to design a video game, a home video game, which meant the cost to build it, our parts cost would have to be like $30 or something. And I'm building this thing with logic chips best way I could figure out how to do. And I was way over that budget, and Nolan didn't seem to mind. And the fact that nobody from General Electric ever wrote us a letter or called or came by didn't really bother me that much because I was having fun working with my friends, building this thing. And next thing, and I tried to make it playable because I had added the speed up and stuff like that. And Nolan said it had to have score and had to have sound. And okay, you put all that stuff in, and then we put it on location just to see what would happen out there. Because Nolan, I think, believed that the game was going to be a driving game or some massive, that computer space kind of failed. Didn't fail, but it was not a big hit. And frankly, it was too complicated. And he thought the success might be more complicated, a driving game or something like that. And so Nolan just gave me the simplest game he could think of to get me, some chops, do the real thing.
Did you ever figure out why he came up with the General Electric story then? Was that just kind of to inspire you a bit, do you think? Or?
Yeah, because he's not going to, he's going to tell Al, I'm going to give you this project, and we're going to work on it for a few months, and then we're going to throw it away and design the real thing. That's not really inspiring me to do the best I can. And I felt I was failing at the job because this was not going to be a home game. It was going to be way too expensive for a home game, but sure as hell, it could be a real deal for an arcade game. a bargain. There was nothing in a Pong game, pretty much. The big money was in the cabinet and the TV set.
Well, when you were working on the design of Pong, I mean, obviously we had Ralph Baer doing the brown box Magnavox Odyssey prototype in the late 60s. It was like a ping pong game on screen. Were you aware of that at the time, and was that an influence at all in the design of Pong?
Not really. I think obviously Nolan was aware of it. It had really not come out. Nolan, when we first started this thing, apparently, according to Nolan, he visited a trade show where they introduced the product. So I was already designing Pong when Nolan first saw the Magnavox Odyssey, right? And it's frankly not that fun a game to play. It's very difficult to have fun playing it. And Nolan saw that. But it was clearly the simplest possible game. To this day, it's the simplest possible video game you could make, right? Mm. One moving object, 2 paddles, and 2 score digits. I mean, nothing. But it turns out that's what the public wanted, okay. And I remember, taking that prototype. Ted Dabney built a cabinet for it over the weekend and put it on at Andy Cap's Tavern. And the owner, Mr. Gaddis, was very helpful and, liked us, and we got along. So we said, hey, we're going to put this new machine in, try it out. Sure. And it was in this cabinet. You've probably seen pictures of the cabinet, right?
Yeah,
it's a little thing. And we put it on a barrel and went and bought a beer and sat back and watched and see. And I remember the first couple of young men to go play it. After they played it, hey, what'd you think? Oh, yeah, good game. I know the guys that invented that. This guy tells us. And we said, hey, save the bullshit for the ladies, okay? And, so that was it. Okay, it seemed to work. People played it. And I was kind of, if you think about it, honestly, think about it. This is a world where pinball machines, they had pinballs were primarily a single-player game, but you could play 1, 2, 3, or 4 people on some pinball machines, okay? But they were in rotation. Pong was the only coin-operated game that required 2 people, had no single-player mode. Very unusual, okay? That's one thing. The other thing was it was 25 cents a play, where pinball machines were 10 cents a play, okay? So was it going to succeed? We didn't know, and I didn't see that there was that much play value, so I had no expectation. And then the surprise was when the machine broke, and it stopped working. And because it was slapped together so quickly, it didn't surprise me that it stopped working. And I went over to fix it and discovered the problem was the coin mech was completely filled with quarters. I'm like, wow, that was something. And I remember taking the quarters and splitting them with the owners per se, and then the next day going back to work, because I did this after work, and I dumped this pile of quarters on Nolan's desk and said, I found the problem.
It's not a bad problem to have, though, is it?
It's occurring. Maybe this isn't such a turkey. And meanwhile, he is planning to give this to Bally, and I think he realized that, hell, I want to be in the business, because we were sort of, Ted Dabney and I and Nolan, the deal was we were going to be consulting engineers. We were brilliant engineers, we thought, and we'd design these things and license them to Bally and other companies and cash royalty checks. That was the plan.
And I think the design of the game, even though, like you said, it's very simplistic, it was, that having that 2-player experience. I mean, I recently played an original Pong machine at a place called Arcade Club here in the UK. And my friend and I were on it, and it's still got the same adrenaline rush that you got the first time you played it. That player versus player thing, which I guess that was probably, I mean, do you kind of think that was the foundation of why people enjoyed it so much, just because it was such a game that really put you against another person and got the adrenaline flowing?
Well, I think that's part of it. I think there are other aspects, too, that are very critical. First off, if you notice, back in those days, you look at a pinball machine, it had naked ladies on it and all kinds of crazy graphics. And Pong was very subdued with just wood panel stuff, right?
Yeah.
And yellow for excitement and black for mystery. And so that was one aspect. So it didn't offend the ladies. Secondly, because it required 2 people, it was also something that the ladies could play just as well as the men. And so it inspired social interaction. mean, that was not my plan at all. I mean, that's just what happened. And so, hey, that was cool. So, it wasn't. So, yeah, in retrospect, it seems like, oh, wow, this was our plan. Well, yeah, no, you just do things, do something and see what happens and react.
Well, were there many companies building clone and copy arcade cabinets around that time? And how did Atari react to that?
Yeah, that was interesting. They say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. My attitude was, don't applaud, just throw money. But we were so underfunded and whatnot, we didn't bother to patent anything. And we knew that the industry we were in, the coin-op people, we weren't going to sue these guys because they weren't that rich, and they would just go off and do something else. So, yeah, it was a little frustrating. I mean, my guess, and who knows, but I think we only made about a third or a quarter of the Pong type games that were out there. They were just all these copies. But what we had that none of the other guys had was we had the ability to design the next game. So that's what we did, and so by designing the next game and inspiring us to move the ball, the industry we became the advanced development group for the entire coin-operated entertainment industry. They would just copy our stuff. And so, okay, but we moved faster than they did. And so, that was Silicon Valley, too.
Well, Atari must have been a very exciting place at the time, and you attracted lots of talent. For example, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak worked at Atari as well. I actually read that you hired Steve Jobs for the position.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, when I looked at Steve Jobs, I wasn't thinking about talent so much as cheap. No, I think what happened was, remember, we were all under 30 years of age, and we were all engineers. We were not experienced management types. We had all worked at Ampex, so we knew how it should be done, but we didn't see why should you have to wear a suit and tie? Why should you have to show up at 8 o'clock and punch a tie, in 1 hour? Why not just get the job done and be enthusiastic about your job and have an open, free environment? And so it became, on several counts, a very fun place to work, very exciting. It was the most exciting place to work. And we would get people drop in, that, hey, they're working at Intel or something like that. And it's kind of boring work. And gee, I could work for a company that's making games and they pay me, and so that attracted we got some very good talent. And and one day Steve Jobs sashayed in, and it was, if I had been at any other company, I would have gotten fired for hiring a guy like that. He was an 18-year-old at that, dropout from Reed College, but he had enthusiasm. And that's what I want. I wanted people that could be enthusiastic about the work that they were doing. And he did that in spades.
How did he persuade you to give him a position then?
Well, in spite of his persuasion, I mean, you should see it's floating around the internet, his application, the real application he filled out. He could barely drive a car. His main qualification was he knew this guy named Steve Wozniak that works at HP. And I said, well, what the hell good does that do me? He's not here. Well, but he's real smart. And what wound up was Woz would come over and stay at Atari and play at Atari because it was more fun after work than Hewlett-Packard. So, and Woz was clearly brilliant guy, character, absolute character. So, it was fun.
Well, they worked on Breakout together, didn't they? I mean, have you got any memories that stand out of Woz and Jobs working with them?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the whole Breakout thing, from my perspective, was really crazy. See, the problem was going on was Nolan, God bless him, has a very short attention span. So he would sashay into engineering and look at the projects underway. We might have had 2 or 3 projects going on at once, and it would take like 3 months or so to finish a game, to design a game and get it to production. And Nolan would change the project halfway through. And I realized, what the hell's going on, Nolan? we're never going to ship anything. We've got to finish a game, you know. Oh, I know. I'm sorry, but I just can't resist. So I had an alert system set up whenever he went into engineering. I had a pager to be used in the event he went into engineering, and I just go in there and put everything back that he had upset. So he got frustrated. So he went around me and hired the one guy I wasn't watching, which was Jobs. And Nolan, I don't think Nolan realized he's not an engineer. He's just a tech. He can solder. And Jobs wouldn't say no. And he took on the job. And unbeknownst to me, and I come into work one morning, and Jobs says, hey, look at this. And there's a finished breakout game, prototype, working on the bench. And, you know, you understand it takes 2 or 3 months to design a game. And it takes a little bit of care and attention and support. And like none of this happened. You just walk in and the game just sprung up out of the carpet. You're like, what? You know what I mean? So, and then Jobs gives me this bullshit that, oh yeah, I designed it. I'm like, no, you didn't. I looked at the schematic. Oh, holy moly. This is incredible, because the deal Nolan cut is famous, was that every chip under 50 would be like $1,000 a chip bonus. Because Pong took 70 some odd chips. So there was no way you could do a breakout game, which had all these paddles and all these other features, for less than 70 chips. So Nolan's saying 50 chips, I'll give you, you know, there was no danger of him having to spend any money at all. Well, he didn't take into account Woz did this job, and Woz did it in like less than a week. And it had like 24 chips in it.
Wow.
Nolan didn't say you had to be able to buy the chips. So Woz had taken chips out of HP that you couldn't get. Oh, man. And it was such an incredible design that normal people, I couldn't understand it fully. And so we really couldn't put it into production. And eventually I gave it to a normal engineer who redesigned it with 100 chips. And it was a big hit, you know. So that's how that came about. And of course, the reality, the truth about how much money was coming out was another thing that kind of affected Woz's and Jobs' relationship. But yeah, those were the days.
Well, when we had Nolan on the show a couple of years ago, he was talking about the fact that Woz and Jobs actually, you know, tried to offer the Apple I as a machine that Atari should release, and he turned them down, and he had somewhat of a regret about that, I think, afterwards. I mean, were you there in any of those meetings at the time?
Oh, yeah, I set them up.
Yeah.
It wasn't the Apple I, it was the Apple II. They had the Apple I out, and the Apple II, Woz had designed the Apple II, which was actually something you could produce. And if you looked at the layout of the printed circuit board, you'd see that it was done by the same PC layout artist that we used, Howard Canton. And the early parts and the early production at Apple were parts from Atari. So we were happy to sell these kids parts they couldn't get. You understand, these guys were 18 years old.
Yeah.
And you can't get a trade account at a semiconductor company. You can't even get a credit card. You know, it was like crazy. So I had to help them get set up at a couple of vendors, just being nice to them, and we helped them out. So Jobs offered the Apple II to actually to Joe Keenan. I set that up because Nolan would say yes. And I'm going, come on, Nolan. You know, and Joe was the president and a real businessman. And he actually didn't get along with Jobs very well. And Jobs pissed him off. Jobs was in his office, and he's picking his bare feet on his desk in the office, and did not endear Joe to anyway. But in reality, I wouldn't change it. It was easy to say that we should have did it, but we were on the verge of putting out a consumer product, and we knew this. And it was going to change the nature of the company. It was going to require all the money we could muster, and we had to put all our efforts behind this consumer Pong game, this home Pong game. And so that was the decision. And I remember Jobs coming out of the office from the meeting with Joe, and all kind of depressed. He said, no, kick me out. and he said, what can we do? Well, I said, I'll introduce you to our venture capitalist, Don Valentine. And we introduced him to Don Valentine. Don saw the thing. I remember Don coming back saying, hey, Al, they're in a garage. And I go, well, isn't that the Silicon Valley story in the garage? He says, yeah, but there's a car in the garage and a washing machine. And I said, well, get him a spot, And so God bless Don. He was a brilliant. If you talked to him and met him, you'd say he was the most conservative guy you ever met. But he took a flyer on this one. Most conservative people wouldn't touch his 2 kids. And what he did, that very few people understand, was he put Mike Markkula in that company. And Mike was a very experienced semiconductor executive that had already made a fortune. And Mike, the company would have imploded if Don Valentine hadn't put Mike in. Mike Markkula is the guy that, did the mundane things like got payroll and shipping and manufacturing working on an orderly basis. And so anyway, it became a hit.
Yeah, I'm going to say it worked out okay for them, didn't it?
Yeah, to our surprise. But hey, we were doing pretty well too.
Yeah, I mean, let's get back to Atari. I mean, obviously, when the VCS, the 2600 came along, that was a system that changed the world as well. I mean, what memories have you got of that?
Boy, yeah, that was a very, the whole release of that was very strange, and most people don't realize that was, I believe it was introduced in the 1977 Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago. I could be off by a year, but I knew it was the summer, the June CES. A year before that, 1 year before that, Nolan had settled. Magnavox sent us a letter threatening to sue us for violating their bullshit patent. And we realized that we weren't going to fight this thing. We had to settle with them. And Nolan got a settlement with them 1 week before the 1976 Consumer Electronics Show that gave Magnavox a 1-year exclusive or permission that any product we introduced at Atari in 365 days from the signing of that document, Magnavox could build. So this inspired us. We weren't going to release it till the June CES anyhow, which would have been, a year and a week beyond that. But it required us to keep our mouths shut, which we normally didn't do. We couldn't keep a secret. But we kept this a secret. And so when it was introduced at the CES, it was a big shock and a big surprise to the industry. So that was one thing. And Nolan had negotiated a paid-up license. It was like $500,000 or something like that. Our attorney said, we could beat that patent. Oh, yeah, we could win that patent. Easy. Oh, yeah, really? Why? How much would it cost? Oh, $1 million, $2 million. And we knew that was that number would be the lowest it would ever cost, and it would take all our time. And so if we could do a paid-up settlement for $500,000 or thereabouts, that was a great deal. And it was paid up. And then everybody else now had to pay them a royalty. So we had a better deal than everybody else in the industry. So that's how that got released on that date.
And when that system came out, I mean, every kid in the world wanted that in their bedroom. I mean, did that really change things at Atari then when the system was released?
Yeah, I mean, at first, sales were tremendous at the beginning, and Warner had taken over by this time, and things were going along well. The honeymoon with Warner was great. Everybody was happy. And it was a great new business because we knew from building all these dedicated games that we had to go with a cartridge-based system, and that was it. And we'd also hired in a group. We'd stolen the consumer electronics engineering group out of National Semiconductor. National Semiconductor was trying to steal our products, and we basically stole the entire engineering team that they had. Because National was not a fun place to work, and we were a lot more fun to work, and we paid them more money. And they came over and did frankly, a much better job designing than I ever could have. But by this time, we had a very competent chip design group. Back in those days, you had to do custom chips. Normally, they were done by a semiconductor company for you, and you had to buy only from them, and the price would be very high. And I'd put together a team that could design our own chips, and Jay Miner and company, and so we were able to design this architecture that was designed by Steve Mayer and Ron Milner up in Grass Valley, and it's brilliant design, which used like 1/3 the parts of anybody else's semiconductor company. We blew away. All these other companies were trying to make compatible competing systems. But the way they did it with the memory map and all that cost 3 or 4 times as much as our system cost. So we had them beat from the get-go.
I find it interesting you mentioned Jay Miner there as well. I always think that Jay is kind of a very unsung hero in the world of video games and engineering. I mean, what memories have you got of working with Jay? Was he a great guy to work alongside?
Oh yeah, he's the sweetest man. He reminded you of Santa Claus. I mean, he looked like Santa Claus, but he was as sweet and nice as you would want Santa Claus to be. And it was funny because towards the end, I'll tell this story. Stop me if you've heard this, but I went in to see Jay, and this is after Warner had taken over, and the company was getting real big. And I went and found Jay in engineering, and how's it going? He was very sad. What happened? He says, they won't let me bring my dog, Mitchie, in. And I go, what? Yeah, security says you can't bring dogs in. I'm like, yeah. So I said, tell you what, tomorrow bring Mitchie and come to my office, in the morning, and we'll take care of it. So I remember it was Nolan and I and Joe, Jay and me and Mitchie went down to security and said, give this dog a badge. I said, I can't do that. And then we explained who worked for who, what the company, I mean, when the company gets big enough, people forget what business you're in, And so we explained to him, oh, okay. So sure. But what employee number? We said 0. So Mitchie got a badge. But, it was real exciting because Jay had the skills to design much better chips than we could design with our little team initially. And we could steal away the best people from the semiconductor company. So we had a pretty good group. But Jay was just a sweetheart. And I remember towards the end, things got so bad, everybody kind of peeled out. And Jay went off to start Amiga.
Yeah.
And that should have been, the Amiga should have been Atari's next system, would have been, had Warner not pissed everybody off.
Well, you were working on a system called Cosmos as well. That looked really innovative. What was that for people unaware of it, and what happened to it? What was its eventual fate?
Yeah. So, before Warner kicked in, I was part of the executive staff, and we worked together as a team with Joe Nolan, Steve Bristow, all the other vice presidents, and we, worked together as friends and as a team. But when Warner kicked in, and Ray Kassar took over, that all went away, and it was no more fun. So, and Nolan, most of the guys had left, and I felt a lot of allegiance to Atari, my baby, I felt like. So I'm not going to walk away from this yet. And I figured, I'm going to go back and build something that's innovative and new, and we'll get it out there. Okay. And so for other reasons, what the hell, just chose holography. It's not that we're supposed to do things. You don't start with the technology and then figure out what kind of game can I make out of it. That's not, you really figure what kind of a game do I want, and then what technology do I need. But I did it backwards for the hell of it. And what Ray had sort of said was, if we could come up with a cartridge-based game system, like the VCS, but only at half the price, half the cost of the VCS. Well, a cartridge in the VCS has one component in it, one chip. So how do you cost reduce that, right? Well, you get rid of the chip altogether. And so we came up with this idea for holography. We had to actually invent the technology, the process for making embossed holograms. We did that, and we didn't bother to patent it. And then that got stolen by American Banknote eventually, and shows up on MasterCards and stuff like that. But that's another fun story. So I, and we had this thing all designed. So it was a holographic. It was a game with a cartridge you put in it was a little LED game, an array of LEDs that shine through a hologram. And so when you crash the spaceship, you'd see a hologram of a spaceship crashing on the moon, and a couple of different images on each hologram. And it was very inexpensive to build. We tooled it up, solved all the problems, and eventually, and we could see marketing didn't want to build it. It was really funny. I had to fight every constipated group in the company, manufacturing, marketing. I remember marketing, I had to do a business plan. Well, I'd never done a business plan for anything before. Seemed to work okay, but okay, I did one, and it showed losing money the first year and making money the next year. And they said, well, you can't do that. You're going to lose money the first year. So I go, why don't I stop this idiocy? So I went and did another business plan for Project X, and it lost even more money. And it was actually the historical of us getting into the consumer business. So I figured, we shouldn't be in the consumer business. So I solved that one. I mean, went on. Manufacturing said they were too busy to build it. I said, great, put that in writing, which he did. I then found a manufacturing company in Texas that would build it faster, cheaper, and better than he did. And all of a sudden, I could build it now. Sure. That kind of, and eventually there was nobody left to say no except Ray Kassar. And one day he just said no. This was after we'd taken it to the toy fair and sold a bunch of them. But anyway, so that was kind of sad. And I realized at that point that was the end of my career at Atari, because nothing was going to get released. I could see that they were afraid. It was really weird. Back in the days, we didn't have any money, and every time we introduced a new product, we were risking the whole company on it. And sometimes it didn't work. Most of the times it did. And now we had enough money that this wouldn't have been, a pimple on our butt if it failed. But now they were afraid to do it. I reasoned because the embarrassment. What if they introduced a new product and it didn't be as good as the last one, so nothing would get out? Well, I tried to explain to Ray Kassar that in the Silicon Valley, if you don't obsolete your own product, somebody else will. And he didn't believe me. So, yeah. And then I finally left. But yeah, they paid me big money not to show up. And we were on Nolan and I and like the top 7 guys were on this, basically on the beach. And but Nolan plotted and schemed, and we basically started just before the term ran out. A bunch of companies. Nolan started Sente and a coin-op company. I had a company that had cartridges. So anyway, yeah, we kept busy, and we kind of thumbed our nose at Atari Warner. But it was sad to see it die when it did. So sad. Yeah.
Well, one of the companies was it Kuma? You did reprogrammable video game cartridge and kiosk systems. That was quite ahead of its time.
Yeah, what happened was back in the 82 time frame, 83, the big issue was SKUs, stock keeping units. And video games were selling fast and furious, but the retailers didn't know, nobody knew what game to order, to stock. And so you got stuck with a lot of inventory that you couldn't move. And because there were all these people making games, some good, some bad, you didn't know. So this was a solution for that. This basically was a vending machine for software, kind of unique because there was no online stuff at that point in time. So you could buy a cartridge that had a static RAM with a battery backup and download a game into it at a kiosk at a terminal or thing like a video game. And and then when you got tired of playing that game, you could go download another game to that cartridge. That was the plan, and we had it working. We had it sold in through Sears. And in 83, all of a sudden, the market exploded, and that was the end of that company.
Did you see the video game crash coming on the horizon?
No, I don't think I did. I saw that Atari's position was certainly going to fail, but I didn't see the whole thing just stopping cold. Like Warner assumed that was it. It's like a hula hoop. The craze is over. That's the end of video games, which wasn't true. But yeah, I didn't see that happening that fast. That was remarkable.
Well, are you much of a gamer yourself then, or are you just into designing them, really?
Yeah, I'm really an engineer, and to me, the fun in Pong was to make it work at all.
Yeah.
And I got to work with cool technology, holography, and work with very smart people and solving interesting problems. But I wasn't much of a game player myself. No, I was more into seeing how to make it work and how to solve some interesting technical problems.
When I was reading articles about things that you've worked on, Al, there was one that I saw. You spent some time at Apple, of course, and I read that you were involved in the creation of the FireWire standard.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. What happened there was Apple hired me as an Apple Fellow in Advanced Technology Group, the research group, and there were a lot of very, very bright people at Apple at that time, but Jobs was gone. And I was pretty good at promoting my ideas and whatnot. And I saw a guy named Mike Tina was working on this project, which became FireWire. And I thought it was really important to really have a wide bandwidth connection for things. And so I helped promote it. I remember taking it to exec staff. I was asked to do a command performance. All the Apple fellows were do a command performance in front of the exec staff, and I did. Part of what I did, I was told I had to explain high temperature superconductors. I don't know, probably if you're old enough to remember that, but they thought somehow it was going to affect it. So anyway, I brought some liquid nitrogen with me, magnets and stuff, and demoed that for them. But said, don't worry about it. But then I explained FireWire, and at the time, get a load of this. If you remember, Apple had this thing called Apple Talk, this Apple Talk network.
Yes.
With the and here I am with the exec staff of Apple Computer, and I told them did you know that you guys are the leading network manufacturer in the world? No. Yeah, you won. You won a war you didn't even know you were in. The network is extremely important. And, they go, oh, but think about that. Think about that. These guys, they're winning a war anyway. So I said, look, it's important, and let's go to the next step. And that was, and so I didn't really do the design, but I just saw how important it was, and I promoted it. And eventually, but to give you an idea, they only got out of Apple. Apple wouldn't release it. They had to wait till Sony adopted it for cameras and video cameras, and then they became one of the last people to adopt something that they invented, which is really kind of sad, Well,
even that, you think of FireWire, the fact that it kind of, it spawned the digital video revolution, and obviously the first iPods used FireWire as well. So it was a very important technology at the time.
Yeah, at the time. And then later on, after that, I got to work on what became MPEG. And that's one of the more exciting things I did, I think. The idea of putting videos in the computer as a data type. I got to, Larry Tesler, my boss, who recently passed, God bless him, put together a team that the finest computer scientists in the world, Ivan Sutherland and Bob Sproul and a few others, and put me in charge of them. And I was scared out of my wits. But we had this Cray computer that was being unused pretty much, and we played with it and did some fundamental work and really helped get the standard going and get it out there. And the best thing that happened to it was Jean-Louis Gasset and Scully thought that it was a stupid idea to put videos in the computer. Who'd do that? Just like watching television. So they left me alone. They did not give me support from anything, thank God, because I would have had marketing, legal. One of the things we did was we made sure we didn't patent anything, because how can you have a standard for communication when it's a proprietary patent? It has to be open to the public,
Yeah, of course. The proprietary ones always just fell by the wayside.
Yeah. So anyway, that was one of my bigger achievements. And at the time, we thought about how it would be used. I think we had a very good understanding. I never thought it would be so popular that the internet would be clogged with puppy videos and kitten videos. But hey, unintended consequences.
Well, Al, talking about things that you're up to today, tell us about Hack the Future. I was reading about this event that you do regularly.
Yeah, it's a little gone silent now with the coronavirus thing. But I want to give back. I felt that I benefited a great deal from mentoring, and we want to give it back. So this group kind of formed ad hoc to volunteer our time as fairly successful technologists in the Valley to share that with young people. So every few months we have a Hack the Future meetup. in a museum or someplace that would be happy to host us. And we'd have like 100 young people, usually junior high school, 10 to 15-year-old, pretty much just pre-high school, before the girls kicked in, and we discovered we don't want to teach, that we just go build something, just go do it, and make a web page, solder a Blinky board, make a video game. And you don't know how to do it. Well, we will show you. We will just lead you by the hand, step through step, and mentor. And like one mentor for every 2 or 3 kids. And the kids walk home with something that they have built and knowledge they didn't have before. And hopefully, we can inspire, yet another nerd.
When you see that passion in their eyes that you had at their age, it must be very satisfying.
Yeah. When a kid, I worked with a little soldering board I came up with, and when you realize in a young person's face that they made something that worked, they could take home and show off. But nowadays, I'm pretty much, like I say, recovering from my back stuff, and now we're locked down, so nothing's going on. But
well, talking about things that are happening this year, obviously the Atari name has been reborn many times, but there's a new VCS system that's meant to be coming out very soon. I mean, what do you think of like the Atari VCS being reborn and like a new generation of system?
Well, I don't know. I'm all for the newer stuff. I like the nostalgia, but I'm not too familiar with what they're doing. I mean, it's really Atari in name only, and I hope they can come up with a good engineering group to actually put something innovative together. But I'm really not too up on what they're doing.
It's good that it's still such an icon in the video games industry, I imagine. That must make you quite proud.
Yeah, it does. It's really funny, as you know, Nolan and I started at Ampex Corporation, right? And you've heard of Ampex, right? Well, most people haven't. And I was really disappointed to go to write something in a spell checker. You put Ampex in and it bounces at unknown word. But Atari, not a problem. And I'm thinking like, wow, how things changed, It's remarkable that, to the extent that Atari has become part of the American culture, I never would have, as a budding anarchist out of Berkeley, it was not in my plan at all.
Well, on behalf of gamers everywhere, thank you so much for all the work you did then that, shaped our childhood and spawned this entire industry. So it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Al. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for letting me talk.